Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch, and you can call me Nike. Today, I want to review a very cool book for you guys, which is Astrology and Homosexuality. I think the way that we'll format this is that first I'll go through some of the technical details, like length, where I got it, whatever, and then we'll get into the actual review portion, and that's where I'll talk about everything that's inside, my opinions, some ideas that sparked from it, and we'll just go from there. Also, we have a guest today, a second little kitty who might not want to stick around, but she is here, the kitten. If you've been following me other places, she is very healthy and very lively and has calmed down significantly, so that's nice. So, technical details first. The book is written by Wim van Dam, and was originally written in Dutch and was translated into English later. It was written in 1983 and then translated in 1985 into English. It's only about 87 pages, so it's not really a very long read, especially considering that a lot of the content involves a lot of diagrams, so some of the pages, the text is only oh so big. And I got it from a place called Wiser Antiquarian. So it's a subset of the Wiser Publishing House, but this is specifically for older books. So this isn't anything that's like being published now. Obviously it's a little bit older, and when I bought this I got two other books that were astrology related that were also written in the 80s. So this is a place where if you want to get a little bit of older texts or things that are sort of out of print, this would be the place to go. And the person who turned me on to this place was Georgina, and you can find her content right here. It's great for especially a lot more of the occult related stuff, if it's things that are a little bit older or maybe out of print. If you're looking for things that are not necessarily like mainstream popular right now, that would be the place to go. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. I only picked out 3, and there was so much more that I could have gotten. It was very exciting, so I'll definitely have to browse more of that and see what other things I could find on there, because this was definitely a little bit of gold. Now, as for the actual content of the book, considering that it was written in the 80s, it's treacherous ground, shall we say, to walk on when you're talking about astrology and homosexuality. So it definitely could have been anything walking into it. And surprisingly, it was really, really good in terms of how it handled queer topics. So for those who don't know, in America in particular, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in America, being gay was considered a mental illness until the 70s. This is only a decade later, so the person who wrote this was alive and around and aware during the time that being gay was still considered a disease, and considering that, they did a really good job at saying, we're not passing judgment, this is not about whether I think it's moral, whether I think it's an illness or not, whether I think it has to do with some sort of neurosis. We're not touching on that. This is merely talking about whether or not you can see homosexuality in the birth chart. So, like, step number 1, just the fact that they decided not to be political about it in that particular way was really nice. One of the other considerations that I really appreciated was that the author did not publish even the time and location of the birth charts in question. He gave a latitude of where the birth chart was at, but he didn't give any specifics because he was helping to protect the identities of these charts. Because if somehow somebody stumbled across it and saw your exact birth time and your city, they could maybe guess that that was you, and that would out you, and that could put your life in danger. So I really appreciated that respect for the privacy and safety, more particularly, of the charts involved. The only time that an actual location was given or a name put to it at all was people that were already publicly out. And there were a few cases of that, not many, but a few. So they definitely made sure if the person was not publicly out, they didn't put them in any danger. One of the other things that I really liked is that there was actually a prior study on astrology and homosexuality and being able to find homosexuality in the birth chart from the 1920s. And the study was by a guy named Carl Heimsoth, something like that. But that study was touched on by the author, and their attitude about that study was surprisingly modern. The 1920s study was very Freudian in nature. It kind of blamed it on neuroses and, the mother, all those kinds of things. And the author essentially laughs at that and very academically kind of makes fun of that because it does seem rather silly. And they're like, yeah, it's without saying it as much, they were basically like, yeah, it's kind of dumb. And the other part that they seemed to disagree with pretty openly was that the 1920s study, the very Freudian study, kind of had this aim to like cure it, like to cure homosexuality by finding its cause in the birth chart. And the author was just like, we're not looking at fixing it, we're just looking at seeing it presented. The other thing that the author pushes back on is the fact that this study has some charts that aren't even confirmed gay men, because the study surrounded specifically gay men. But some of these charts were not even necessarily gay people's charts. It was just charts that the original study said looked like homosexuality, regardless of if it actually was or not. So it was, in a way, accusing these charts of being gay without them actually being so. And in that way, it's almost useless to do that. Like, number one, you are trying to falsely out somebody in the 1920s, even more dangerous than it was in the 1980s. And number two, it's not even relevant to the study because it's not the birth chart of a gay person. After covering this study, the author is very self-aware, another thing that I appreciated, in that he says, clearly this 1920 study is a product of its time, and we should make sure to understand that, but it's interesting to see how much has changed from the 1920s to the 1980s when these two studies were done, and he recognizes that it is very possible that this book itself and the studies that he is doing will themselves become outdated in another 50 years, which is where we are now. Hello, ma'am. Hi. Did you want to hang out? Hi, baby. Now, as for the actual technique. Yes? Don't eat the microphone! No! You're only allowed to be up here if you behave. Now, as for the actual technique. The author uses, number one, Placidus houses, so we have to be aware of that. I personally use whole sign houses for most of what I do, but there are times and places to use other styles of house division. And he's also using a technique that uses something called Navamsa charts. So this is an Indian technique. I don't know a whole lot about it, but essentially you can use calculations to find other placements in relation to this chart. It's a whole thing. I won't really get into it, but this is what he uses. And it's not just about where planets are in the birth chart or their condition in the birth chart, but it's also their relation to these Navamsa placements. You don't have to be an expert in these. Very handily, he actually includes a chart in the back of the book that shows you how to find Navamsa placements yourself, and very clearly goes through instructions on each and every placement. I won't get into the technique too much as to which planets in which positions and which relation to each other exactly that he's looking at, but the main thing is that for cisgendered homosexual men, he's looking at the moon and at Saturn. Now, while the majority of this book covers cisgender gay men, there's also some surprising stuff in the back. So there's a much smaller section because there is a smaller amount of available charts back then when he was doing this study on cisgendered lesbian women. So there's a small section on those and the differences and his surprising finds and the interest in that and seeing how much that technique works. And he actually gives statistics about the amount of charts that he studied and how much the technique that he's decided on seems to work in regards to those. But he also acknowledges he doesn't have that many, so it's kind of hard to say definitively that this is how much it comes up without having a much larger sample size to work with. So he's very aware that the technique still needs a lot of work and that he does not have that big of a sample size to go with, but does make the effort to look at cisgendered lesbian women's charts. The book does not cover bisexuality in any regard or asexuality or anything like that, but what I was most surprised to find is that actually there is a section in the back with 4 charts of transgender women. And that's crazy. For the 1980s and for that to be studied seriously and with respect was so shocking to me. I was really glad to see it because not only did the author even think to include transgender people in relation to lesbian women and gay men, but the author refers to them as women. He acknowledges they were people who were born men, assigned male at birth, but are now women, and then refers to them as women with she/her pronouns very respectfully. It's amazing. And again, this section is not very large, just like the section on cisgendered lesbian women. There is an acknowledgement that there are only so many charts that he was able to get for the purposes of the study, so it's by no means an extensive one, but including them at all and finding some of these indications that he was able to find was still very interesting to be able to look at. And it proves that there are things of interest to be able to look at within these charts and the differences within them, that trans women's charts are not going to be the same as cisgender gay men's charts, and they're not going to be the same as lesbian women's charts, because the indication for each was all different. And that's fascinating to me. Overall, the book was really interesting. I actually really enjoyed it, and it's really thought-provoking. It left me with some questions that are more of things that would need to be studied now, and I would love to see some stuff written on it, and I may seek out some modern books talking about LGBT stuff and astrology and how those play together. But as far as this actual book study goes, I really enjoyed it. Planets aside, a lot of the findings also dealt with the cusps of the 6th and 12th houses, because in Placidus houses they're going to shift around a little bit. So some of those cusps were involved, and it makes me wonder a little bit if modern findings, if you use the same technique that evolves the chart, if you might find modern homosexual indications using different houses. Maybe it would be the 5th and the 11th instead of the 6th and 12th, because the social circumstances differed. So instead of things needing to be hidden, as the 6th and 12th often can indicate and involve, maybe it would deal more with the 5th and 11th houses, with community and with pleasure and passion. So it's really something that would definitely be worth studying a little bit more, and if any astrologers out there wanted to look into it, I think it would be really cool to use this book as your base. And now that we have the Astro Data Bank, there are gay charts in there. You could look them up and see some of these indications. So it could be really interesting to run a study parallel with this one to see if and how any of these indications may or may not have changed. In the end, I'm really glad I picked this one up. If anybody out there is interested in getting themselves a copy and are able to get your hands on it, I definitely recommend. I don't know if Wiser Antiquarian has more, but if you can get your hands on this one way or another, it's very, very fun, and it's a lovely addition into my little astrology bookshelf. And that's all I've got for you guys this week. So if you're not already following me places, you should definitely be following me. If you're not subscribed here, what are you doing? Subscribe. If you prefer a written version of this video, I actually have an article that I published on my website first that is a little bit more technical and goes into a little bit more detail about the book itself and its contents. Otherwise, follow me places. I have a website where I write other articles, so if you haven't gone to that yet, you should do it. I co-host a podcast with my friends Dot Darling and Anthony Wolfe, and occasionally our friend Temperance Alden, called Magnolias Magic. So if you want to hear more of my lovely voice and all sorts of occult and witchy topics, you should go listen to that as well. We're on Spotify and YouTube and all sorts of other podcasting platforms. If you feel like supporting me, I also have a Patreon where you get content early, and you get some bonus content sometimes where I take pictures and I give it to you guys as special little treats. And that's about it. So I'll see you guys next time, and blessed be.